White waitress dumps water on ex-convict, unaware he's the owner of the restaurant. The ceramic plate hit the floor at exactly 7:43 p.m., shattering into a dozen pieces that skittered across the polished marble like accusations. Every head in Romano's fine dining turned toward the sound, forks frozen mid-air, conversations dying in throats. Marcus stood there, 34 years old, wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, holding a mop he'd been using to clean a spill near table 7. His hands, scarred from years of kitchen work, gripped the wooden handle as he stared at the mess he'd accidentally caused by bumping a server's tray. "Are you kidding me right now?" Jennifer's voice cut through the silence like a knife. The head waitress, blonde and sharp-featured, stormed toward him with the kind of rage that comes from someone who's been waiting for an excuse. "Do you have any idea how much those plates cost?" Marcus opened his mouth to apologize, but Jennifer wasn't finished. She grabbed a full pitcher of ice water from the nearest table and, without hesitation, dumped the entire contents over his head. The freezing water soaked through his shirt, dripping onto the floor he'd just cleaned. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. A woman at table 3 covered her mouth. A businessman at the bar pulled out his phone. "That's what happens when ex-cons think they can work in decent establishments," Jennifer announced loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "People like you should stick to places that match your level. Not here. Not around respectable people who've actually earned their place in society." Marcus stood perfectly still, water streaming down his face, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. But his eyes held something that made Jennifer's coworker Sarah take an instinctive step backward. It wasn't anger. It was control. The kind of control that only comes from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. "I apologize for the plate," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. He reached into his pocket with dripping hands and pulled out a $50 bill, placing it carefully on the nearest table. "This should cover it." Jennifer laughed, a sharp sound that made several diners wince. "Oh, how generous. $50 from someone who probably stole it. Tell me, how long have you been out? A month? 2? They always send you people here thinking you deserve second chances." She turned to the restaurant manager hovering near the kitchen door. "Robert, get him out of here before he breaks something else or worse." What Jennifer didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she stood there triumphant in her cruelty, was that Marcus had been counting. 6 months. 6 months since his release from a 5-year sentence for a crime he didn't commit. 6 months of working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, saving every dollar while lawyers worked to clear his name. 6 months of being invisible, accepting disrespect, biding his time. And 3 days ago, something had changed. Something Jennifer would discover soon enough when she realized that the maintenance worker she just humiliated had a meeting scheduled with corporate tomorrow morning. A meeting where documents would be signed. Documents that would transfer ownership of Romano's fine dining to its new proprietor. Marcus picked up his mop without another word, his movements deliberate and calm. As he walked toward the service entrance, water still dripping from his clothes, he caught his reflection in the decorative mirror by the bar. Behind him, Jennifer was already complaining to other staff, embellishing the story, turning his silence into admission of inferiority. She had no idea that the quiet man she just drenched was about to become her boss. And that her actions tonight had just sealed a fate she never saw coming. If you're enjoying this story of justice and unexpected reversals, make sure to subscribe because what happens when Jennifer discovers the truth will leave you absolutely speechless. The next morning, Jennifer arrived at Romano's with the confidence of someone who'd already won. She'd spent the previous night texting screenshots to her friends, laughing about how she'd put that ex-con in his place. The group chat had exploded with supportive messages, each one feeding her sense of righteousness. "Did you see his face?" she told her coworker Sarah while setting up the bar area. "Completely blank. That's what 5 years in prison does to you. Breaks you down until you can't even defend yourself." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, wiping down glasses with more focus than necessary. "Jennifer, don't you think that was a bit harsh?" He apologized immediately. He even paid for the plate. Jennifer's eyes flashed. "Harsh? You know what's harsh? Having to work alongside someone with a criminal record. Do you know what he did? Robert told me he was convicted of embezzlement. Stole from his own company. People like that don't change, Sarah. They just get better at hiding it." What Jennifer didn't know was that Marcus's conviction had been overturned 3 weeks ago. New evidence had surfaced, security footage that had been mysteriously deleted during the original trial. The real embezzler, Marcus's former business partner, was now serving the sentence Marcus had wrongly endured. The exoneration had made local news, but Jennifer never watched the news. She preferred social media, where she could control the narrative of her own superiority. Marcus had founded TechBridge Solutions at 26, building it from a garage startup into a company worth $40 million. His partner, David Reinhardt, had systematically stolen over $2 million while Marcus took the fall. 5 years of Marcus's life, stolen. His reputation, destroyed. His fiancée, gone. Everything except his determination to rebuild. During those 5 years inside, Marcus had done something unusual. He'd studied business management, hospitality, real estate law. He'd read every book the prison library had on restaurant ownership, memorizing profit margins, health codes, employee management. Other inmates thought he was crazy, planning for a future that seemed impossible. But Marcus had learned something valuable in that cell. Patience and preparation were more powerful than rage. Robert Chun, the restaurant manager, had been watching Jennifer's behavior for months. The subtle racism disguised as standards. The way she treated kitchen staff versus front of house. How she smiled differently at customers based on their appearance. He documented everything, knowing that eventually, someone would need that information. When corporate called him yesterday requesting detailed employee files, Robert had known something significant was happening. When they specifically asked about Jennifer Torres's employment history, disciplinary records, and customer complaints, he'd felt a mixture of dread and vindication. Jennifer had 13 formal complaints in her 2 years at Romano's. Customers reporting condescending treatment, accusations of theft against busboys that were never proven, comments about people not belonging in fine dining. But she was friends with the previous owner's daughter, which had made her untouchable. Past tense. 3 days ago, Romano's fine dining had been purchased by Apex Hospitality Group for $7 million. The sale had been quiet, handled through lawyers and shell companies. The staff hadn't been informed yet because the new owner wanted to observe operations first, to understand the culture before making changes. He'd been coming in for a week, working maintenance, cleaning tables, watching everything. Marcus had specifically requested they not announce his arrival. He wanted to see the real Romanos, not the performance version that appears when the boss is watching. And what he'd seen had been enlightening. The kitchen staff were overworked and underpaid. The busboys were treated like servants. And Jennifer Torres ran the front of house like her personal kingdom, wielding her position to elevate herself by diminishing others. That afternoon, Jennifer received an email that made her blood run cold. All staff were required to attend a mandatory meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. The new ownership would be introducing themselves and discussing changes to restaurant operations. Attendance was not optional. Changes, Jennifer muttered to Sarah, her confidence finally cracking. You know what that means. They're going to bring in their own people. We'll probably all be replaced by cheaper workers who don't know quality service. Sarah didn't respond. She was too busy thinking about the man who'd stood perfectly still while ice water dripped down his face. The way his eyes had held something that looked like calculation rather than defeat. The $50 bill he'd left without arguing, when most people would have erupted in anger. That evening, Marcus sat in his modest apartment, reviewing the employee files Robert had sent. Jennifer's record painted a clear picture of someone who used her position to exercise power over those she deemed beneath her. But there was something else there too, buried in her employment application from 2 years ago. A reference letter from a domestic violence shelter where she'd volunteered. A personal essay about overcoming an abusive relationship and wanting to help others find their strength. Something had changed in Jennifer Torres. Something had turned a woman who once helped abuse survivors into someone who now inflicted emotional abuse on others. Marcus recognized that transformation because he'd seen it in prison. People who'd been hurt so badly that they started hurting others, believing that staying on top meant pushing everyone else down. The meeting tomorrow would determine many things. Jennifer's employment, certainly. But also whether Marcus would use his new power the way Jennifer had used hers, or whether he could break the cycle of people with authority wielding it as a weapon against the vulnerable. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Documents signed. You officially own Romano's as of midnight tonight. Congratulations, Marcus. You've earned this. Marcus looked at the employee files again, particularly Jennifer's photo. She had no idea that the man she'd humiliated was about to walk into that meeting room as her employer. That every word she'd said, every assumption she'd made, was about to collide with a reality she never imagined possible. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences. The question was what form those consequences would take, and whether Marcus would choose justice or revenge. Because unlike Jennifer, Marcus understood the difference between the two, and that difference would define everything that happened next. Marcus arrived at Romano's at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the mandatory staff meeting. The restaurant was empty except for the early kitchen crew preparing for lunch service. He'd asked Robert to meet him in the office to review final details before the announcement. "Here's what I need you to understand," Marcus said, spreading Jennifer's file across the desk. "This isn't about revenge. It's about creating a workplace where people are valued regardless of their past." Robert nodded slowly, studying Marcus with careful eyes. "You could fire her immediately. With her complaint record, no one would question it." "I could," Marcus agreed. "But that would make me exactly what she assumed I was. Someone who uses power to hurt people." He pulled out another folder, this one containing the backgrounds of every staff member. "Did you know that Carlos, the busboy she accused of stealing last month, sends money back to Mexico to support his disabled sister? Or that Maria in the kitchen is studying for her nursing degree at night?" Robert leaned forward. "What are you planning?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm going to give Jennifer exactly what she fears most. A choice. And unlike her, I'm going to let her make it with full knowledge of the consequences." What Marcus had discovered during his week of observation went deeper than Jennifer's cruelty. The entire restaurant operated on a hierarchy of disrespect. The previous owner had cultivated an environment where those at the top could abuse those below, as long as the customers remained happy and the money kept flowing. Jennifer wasn't an anomaly. She was a product of the system. At 7 a.m., Marcus's lawyer, Patricia Vance, arrived with a briefcase full of documents. She'd been his public defender during the trial, the only person who'd believed in his innocence when everyone else had written him off. When the new evidence surfaced, she'd worked pro bono to overturn his conviction, refusing payment until he was free. "You know you don't owe Jennifer Torres anything," Patricia said, reviewing the termination papers Marcus had decided not to sign. "She humiliated you publicly, made assumptions based on your record, violated multiple workplace conduct policies." "I know," Marcus replied quietly. "But I spent 5 years watching men become harder, angrier, more broken by a system that punished them without offering redemption. I won't build that same system here." Patricia studied him carefully. "You're a better person than most, Marcus. Just make sure that kindness doesn't become weakness. Some people interpret mercy as permission to continue harmful behavior." At 8 a.m., Marcus received a call from his former cellmate, Devon. They'd maintained contact after release, both navigating the brutal reality of rebuilding lives society had decided weren't worth saving. "Man, are you really doing this?" Devon asked, his voice carrying equal parts admiration and concern. "Buying a whole restaurant? That's not just success. That's a statement." "It's more than that," Marcus said. "It's proof. Proof that the worst moment of your life doesn't have to define every moment after." Devon was silent for a moment. "What about the waitress? The one from your story?" "She'll be at the meeting in an hour." "And then what?" "And then she'll learn something I had to learn the hard way. That the person you're cruel to today might be the person who determines your future tomorrow." By 8:30 a.m., staff began arriving for the meeting. Jennifer walked in with false confidence, her designer purse swinging from her shoulder, her makeup perfect, her smile practiced. She dressed to impress, assuming the new owner would be charmed by her polished appearance and years of experience. Sarah arrived quietly, taking a seat near the back. She'd barely slept, haunted by the image of Marcus standing perfectly still while water dripped down his face. Something about his composure had unsettled her more than any anger would have. Robert gathered everyone in the private dining room typically reserved for special events. 23 staff members filled the chairs, whispering nervously about what changes the new ownership would bring. Jennifer sat front and center, ready to position herself as indispensable. "Before we begin," Robert announced, I want to remind everyone that Romano's has been under new ownership for exactly 12 hours. The new proprietor has been observing operations for the past week, getting to understand our culture and workflow before making any decisions. Jennifer's heart skipped. A week? She mentally reviewed the past 7 days, searching for any moment she might have been watched by someone important. Nothing stood out except that incident with the ex-con maintenance worker. That hardly mattered. The new owner has requested that I read a statement before introducing them, Robert continued, pulling out a prepared document. It says, I believe every person deserves dignity in their workplace. I believe past mistakes should not determine future possibilities. And I believe that how we treat those we perceive as powerless reveals everything about our character. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. That last line felt pointed, though she couldn't imagine why. The new owner also wants you to know that significant changes are coming. Pay raises for kitchen staff. Profit sharing for all employees. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination or harassment of any kind. Robert paused, his eyes finding Jennifer in the crowd. Starting immediately. The room erupted in whispers. Kitchen staff exchanged hopeful glances. Busboys sat up straighter. Even the bartender, who'd worked there 15 years, looked surprised. And now, Robert said, I'd like to introduce the new owner of Romano's Fine Dining. The door to the office opened. Marcus stepped out, wearing a tailored suit that transformed him completely from the maintenance worker Jennifer remembered. His presence filled the room, confident and controlled. Every eye turned toward him. Every whisper died. Jennifer's face drained of color so quickly that Sarah grabbed her arm, thinking she might faint. The water pitcher. The cruel words. The assumptions about criminality and worth. Every moment replayed in Jennifer's mind in vivid, horrifying detail. Marcus stood at the front of the room, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet control it had held 2 nights ago, dripping wet in front of dozens of witnesses. Some of you know me as the maintenance worker who's been cleaning tables this week. What you don't know is why I chose to spend my first week of ownership working alongside you rather than above you. He paused, letting that sink in. Jennifer couldn't breathe. I wanted to see the real Romanos, not the performance version. And what I saw was a workplace divided into those with power and those without it. Those who matter and those who don't. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Jennifer before moving on. That ends today. Marcus walked slowly to the center of the room, his footsteps the only sound in the absolute silence. 23 pairs of eyes followed his movement, but none more intensely than Jennifer's, whose hands trembled in her lap as realization crashed over her in suffocating waves. 2 nights ago, Marcus began, his voice measured and clear, I was cleaning near table 7 when I accidentally knocked a server's tray. A plate broke. It was my fault, and I apologized immediately. He paused, letting the memory settle over the room. What happened next taught me everything I needed to know about the culture that's been allowed to flourish here. Jennifer wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never resurface. Sarah squeezed her arm, but the gesture felt more like restraint than comfort. I had ice water dumped on my head, Marcus continued, his eyes finally locking onto Jennifer's. In front of customers. In front of staff. I was told that ex-cons shouldn't work in decent establishments. That people like me should stick to places that match my level. That I didn't belong around respectable people. Several staff members turned to look at Jennifer, whose face had gone from pale to crimson. Tears were already forming in her eyes, but Marcus wasn't finished. Here's what Jennifer Torres didn't know that night. Marcus pulled out a document from his jacket pocket. 5 years ago, I was wrongfully convicted of embezzlement. I spent 5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. 3 weeks ago, my conviction was overturned. New evidence proved my former business partner framed me, deleted security footage, and let me take the fall while he walked free. Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who hadn't witnessed the water incident were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. I didn't tell anyone my real identity when I started working here last week, because I wanted to see how people treated someone they perceived as powerless. Someone with a criminal record. Someone they assumed had no future, no value, no right to dignity. Marcus's voice never rose, but the weight of his words filled every corner of the room. And Jennifer showed me exactly what I needed to see. Jennifer stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Mr. Hayes, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. If I had known who you were. Stop, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time. That's exactly the problem. You wouldn't have treated me that way if you'd known I was the owner. But you felt completely justified doing it to someone you thought was just a maintenance worker with a record. That reveals everything about your character, Jennifer. Not mine. Tears streamed down Jennifer's face now, mascara running in dark trails. Please, I need this job. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I know you need this job, Marcus said quietly, pulling out another folder. I know your rent is $1,800 a month and you're behind 2 months. I know your car payment is overdue. I know you're drowning in credit card debt and barely surviving. He held up the employment file. I also know that 2 years ago, you volunteered at a domestic violence shelter. You wrote in your application essay about wanting to help people who felt powerless find their strength again. Jennifer's sobs caught in her throat. How did he know about that? What happened to you, Jennifer? Marcus asked, and for the first time, his voice carried something other than controlled fury. It carried genuine curiosity. What turned someone who helped abuse survivors into someone who abuses others? The room held its breath. Jennifer stood there, trembling, mascara-stained tears dripping onto her uniform. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My ex-husband. He destroyed my confidence, my career, my savings. When I left him, I had nothing. I was starting over at 24, feeling worthless. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes red and swollen. This job was supposed to be temporary. But I got stuck here. And every day, I saw people who seemed to have it easy, who hadn't suffered like I had. And I started to resent them. Started to think if I could make them feel small, maybe I'd feel bigger. So you became what hurt you, Marcus said simply. Jennifer nodded, unable to speak. Marcus turned to address the entire room. Here's what's going to happen. Jennifer Torres is not fired. Not today. Shock registered on every face, especially Jennifer's. Instead, she's going to spend the next month working in the kitchen. Minimum wage. She's going to learn what it's like to be treated the way she's been treating others. She's going to experience firsthand what Carlos feels when someone assumes he's a thief. What Maria feels when someone talks down to her because of her accent. What I felt when someone decided my past meant I didn't deserve basic human respect. He stepped closer to Jennifer, who was now shaking uncontrollably. At the end of that month, you'll have a choice. You can return to your position with a new understanding of what real service means, treating every person who walks through that door with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. Or you can leave. But I won't make that choice for you, Jennifer. Because unlike you, I believe people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. Jennifer collapsed back into her chair, overwhelmed by the mercy she absolutely didn't deserve. Around her, staff members were processing what they'd just witnessed. Not destruction, but redemption offered to someone who'd offered none. One more thing, Marcus said, his voice hardening again. If anyone, and I mean anyone, treats Jennifer with the same disrespect she showed others during this month, they're fired immediately. We don't break the cycle of abuse by perpetuating it. We break it by refusing to participate. He pulled out his phone and held up a screen showing security footage from 2 nights ago. The entire water dumping incident captured in high definition. This video has been seen by our corporate attorneys, our HR department, and our insurance company. It's been saved in multiple locations. Jennifer, if you choose to sue for wrongful termination or claim discrimination, this footage and your 13 formal complaints will be presented as evidence. Do you understand? Jennifer nodded, unable to form words. Good. Robert will assign you your kitchen duties starting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Marcus turned to the rest of the staff. Everyone else, welcome to a new era at Romano's. Pay raises take effect next week. Profit-sharing details will be distributed by Friday. And remember, how you treat the person serving you says nothing about them and everything about you. As the meeting dispersed, staff members filed out in stunned silence. Some looked at Jennifer with pity. Others with barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah stayed behind, sitting next to her friend who was still crying quietly. Marcus approached them, causing Jennifer to flinch involuntarily. He extended his hand, and after a moment of confusion, she took it. "This is your second chance, Jennifer. Don't waste it." His grip was firm but not cruel. "I spent 5 years learning that mercy is more powerful than revenge. Now it's your turn to learn that lesson. The hard way." 30 days changed everything at Romano's fine dining, though not in the ways anyone expected. Jennifer's first morning in the kitchen started at 6 a.m. sharp. Carlos, the busboy she'd once accused of theft, was assigned as her trainer. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Jennifer, who arrived with trembling hands and eyes still swollen from a sleepless night. "Good morning," Carlos said simply, handing her an apron. No malice. No satisfaction. Just the quiet dignity of someone who'd never lost his humanity despite how he'd been treated. That simple greeting broke something inside Jennifer. She'd expected anger, revenge, the same cruelty she'd shown others. Instead, she received basic human decency from someone she'd tried to destroy. The lesson cut deeper than any punishment could have. The kitchen was brutal. 12-hour shifts on her feet, burns from hot pans, the relentless pace of dinner service. But worse than the physical exhaustion was watching how the staff treated each other. Maria, the cook studying for her nursing degree, shared her lunch without being asked. Tommy, the dishwasher, covered Jennifer's station when she fell behind. These were the people she'd looked down on, dismissed as beneath her, and they were showing her more grace than she'd shown anyone in years. Marcus came to the kitchen every morning at 7 a.m., not to supervise, but to work. He'd roll up his sleeves and help with prep, learning everyone's name, asking about their families, their dreams. Jennifer watched him chop vegetables beside Carlos, discussing soccer and Carlos's sister's progress in physical therapy. This was the same man she drenched with ice water, and he was treating her victims like family. By the end of week 2, Jennifer's hands were covered in small burns and cuts. Her feet ached constantly. Her back screamed from hours of standing. And for the first time in years, she understood what she'd been too privileged to see. Survival took everything these people had, and she'd been making it harder just to feel superior. One evening after closing, Jennifer found Marcus reviewing financial reports in his office. She knocked hesitantly, still afraid despite his promise of a second chance. "Come in, Jennifer." She stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. "I wanted to say, I've been thinking about what you said. About me becoming what hurt me." Her voice cracked. "My ex-husband used to dump things on me. Water, food, whatever was nearby. He'd do it in front of his friends to humiliate me. And I swore when I left him that no one would ever make me feel powerless again." Marcus looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "But that's exactly what I did to you," Jennifer continued, tears flowing freely now. "I found someone I thought was powerless, and I hurt them because it made me feel strong. I became him. I became everything I hated." "That's the cycle," Marcus said quietly. Hurt people, unless someone breaks the pattern." "Why didn't you just fire me?" Jennifer asked, the question she'd been carrying for 2 weeks. "You had every right. Every reason." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "In prison, I watched men become monsters because the system treated them like monsters. I watched potential disappear because society decided their mistakes defined them forever. I promised myself that if I ever had power again, I'd use it differently." He paused. "But Jennifer, this only works if you actually change. Not just your behavior, but your heart. Can you do that?" Jennifer nodded slowly. "I want to try. These past 2 weeks, working with people I used to look down on, seeing how hard they work, how kind they are despite everything." She wiped her eyes. "I don't want to be who I was. I want to be better." On day 30, Marcus called another staff meeting. Jennifer stood at the front of the room, her appearance transformed. No perfect makeup, no designer clothes. Just the exhausted but genuine face of someone who'd been broken down and was trying to rebuild. "I owe all of you an apology," she began, her voice shaking but clear. "For 2 years, I made this workplace toxic. I treated people as less than human because of their position, their background, their accent. I used whatever power I had to make others feel small." She looked directly at Carlos. I accused you of stealing because I needed someone to blame for my own failures. I'm sorry. She turned to Maria. I mocked your English because hearing your accent reminded me that you were working toward something while I was stuck. I'm sorry. One by one, she acknowledged her victims, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. When she finished, the room was silent. Marcus stood. Jennifer has completed her 30 days. The question now is whether she stays in the kitchen or returns to front of house. Jennifer's head snapped up in surprise. I assumed I'd stay in the kitchen. I don't deserve. That's not how this works, Marcus interrupted. You've done the time. You've done the work. Now you get to choose who you want to be moving forward. Jennifer looked around the room at faces that had witnessed her transformation. Some skeptical, some hopeful, all waiting to see what she'd choose. I want to stay in the kitchen, she said finally. Not as punishment, but because I'm learning things I should have known years ago. About work, about respect, about what actually matters. She looked at Carlos and Maria. I want to keep learning from people who never lost their humanity, even when someone like me tried to take it away. 6 months later, Romano's fine dining had transformed completely. Employee turnover dropped to 0. Customer reviews highlighted not just the food, but the genuine warmth of the staff. Marcus had created something rare, a workplace built on dignity instead of hierarchy. Jennifer was promoted to kitchen manager, not because of her previous experience, but because she'd earned the respect of every person who worked there. She'd proven that change was possible, even for someone who'd fallen as far as she had. One evening, a well-dressed customer began snapping his fingers at Carlos, demanding faster service with barely concealed contempt. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen, her voice calm but firm. Sir, at Romano's we treat every staff member with respect. If you can't do that, I'll need to ask you to leave. The customer sputtered, shocked. Do you know who I am? I'll have you fired. Then you'll have to fire me too, Marcus said, appearing beside Jennifer. Because she's absolutely right. We don't tolerate disrespect here. Not toward our staff, and not toward our customers. But respect has to go both ways. The customer left, and Jennifer turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. Marcus smiled. Someone once told me that mercy is more powerful than revenge. I'm just glad you proved them right. That night, as Jennifer locked up the restaurant, she thought about the person she'd been 6 months ago. Bitter, cruel, convinced that making others feel small was the only way to feel big. She thought about Marcus, standing perfectly still while ice water dripped down his face, already planning not revenge, but redemption. The best revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. It's becoming so successful, so complete in your own transformation, that you can offer them the same grace they denied you. Marcus had taught her that. And now, every single day, Jennifer worked to pass that lesson forward. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about justice, redemption, and the power of choosing mercy over revenge. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in tearing someone down, but in lifting them up to become who they were always meant to be.